My name is Thea Callahan, and I was 32 years old the afternoon my sister-in-law tried to dismantle me in front of 40 people at a charity luncheon. I want to tell you exactly how that went for her. But first, I need to tell you about the 14 months before it. When Randall and I separated, I did not fall apart the way everyone expected me to. That surprised people, including me. I had built so much of my adult life around that marriage. The Saturday morning farmers markets, the joint checking account, the holiday cards with both our names on them. And when it ended, I thought the absence of all of it would hollow me out completely. Instead, what I felt, in those first raw weeks, was something closer to relief. Like I had finally stopped holding my breath after years of pretending not to notice I was doing it. I kept the condo in Lincoln Park. Randall moved back to the suburb where he'd grown up, closer to his mother's house, which felt fitting. I kept my job at Hartley and Associates, the architecture firm where I'd been a project lead for 6 years. I kept my Friday night dinners with my college roommate Pam, who had never liked Randall in the first place and had the grace not to say so until after the papers were signed. I kept going. That was the thing nobody prepares you for after a marriage ends. How much of ordinary life just continues, indifferent, requiring your attention and your presence regardless of whether your heart feels like participating. Randall's sister, Deirdre, did not make any of that easy. Deirdre had always been the kind of woman who kept score. Not loudly, she was too controlled for that, too careful about her image, but quietly, in the way she filed information away and retrieved it at the precise moment it would do the most damage. She was 4 years older than Randall, divorced herself, though you'd never have known it from the way she talked about other people's failures. She had 2 kids in private school, a house in Hinsdale, and a talent for framing cruelty as concern. She had never thought I was good enough for her brother. That wasn't subtext. That was the actual text, delivered in 100 small ways over the 8 years I was married to him. The way she'd said Thea's job with a faint pause before the word job, like she was still deciding if it counted. The way she'd looked at my hands at Thanksgiving one year, my short, unpolished nails, the calluses from drafting, and said, almost to herself, "You really are so practical." The way she'd asked at every family gathering for the first 3 years of our marriage, when we were planning to start a family, and then, when I finally told her we weren't, had gone very still and said, "Oh, I see." When Randall and I separated, Deirdre's response had been to tell everyone in their family that I had been emotionally unavailable for years, that I had chosen my career over my husband, that she had seen it coming. She wasn't wrong about the career part. I had been promoted twice during our marriage, had led the restoration of a historic courthouse downtown that won a regional design award, had worked late more times than I could count. What she didn't say, and what I never corrected, was that Randall had chosen someone else before I had chosen anything. But that part of the story didn't fit the version she preferred, so she left it out. I found out about Randall and his coworker Simone 6 weeks before we separated. I did not make a scene. I called a divorce attorney, started gathering documents, and told Randall quietly that I knew, and that I wanted him out of our shared space within 30 days. He cried. He apologized. He told me Deirdre had always said I was impossible to get close to, and that maybe she was right. I didn't argue. I had learned a long time ago that you don't win an argument with someone who needs you to be the villain. The months after the divorce were strange, and then they were steadier, and then, slowly, they were something I hadn't expected. Mine. Fully and completely mine in a way nothing had been in years. I threw myself into a project, a community arts center commission in Pilsen, the kind of work I'd been quietly hoping for since I was 25 years old and sketching buildings in the margins of my grad school notebooks. The budget was tight, the timeline was aggressive, and I was the happiest as I'd been in a decade. I also met someone. Not immediately, and not dramatically. His name was Patrick, and I met him at a zoning board meeting in March, which is the least romantic sentence I have ever written in my life, but happens to be completely true. He was there representing a real estate investment firm. I was there for the Pilsen project. We argued politely about setback requirements for 20 minutes, and then he bought me coffee to apologize for being wrong, and then we had dinner 6 days later, and it went on from there. Patrick was steady. That is the word I keep coming back to when I think about him in those early months. He was 38, had never been married, ran the capital investment division of a mid-sized development firm called Vantage Partners, and he had this quality of stillness about him. Not coldness, not distance, just the particular calm of someone who has figured out what actually matters to him and doesn't waste energy on the rest. He made me laugh. He remembered things I'd said 3 conversations ago. He was the kind of person who, when he said he would call, called. I did not tell Deirdre about him. I did not tell anyone in Randall's family about him. That part of my life was mine, and I had learned to protect what was mine. The charity luncheon was in October, an annual fundraiser for an arts education nonprofit. Deirdre sat on the board, which is how I ended up there. I had been asked, through a mutual colleague, to speak briefly about the Pilsen Arts Center as an example of community-funded design. I almost declined. Then I thought about the 14 months I had spent rebuilding myself, and I thought about how little I owed Deirdre the satisfaction of my absence from rooms I had earned the right to be in, and I confirmed. I dressed carefully that morning, not to impress anyone. Just because I had reached the age where I understood that the way you walk into a room is the first sentence of whatever story you're telling, and I wanted my sentence to be clear. Gray wool blazer, dark trousers, the good earrings Pam had given me for my birthday. I drove to the hotel in River North, found parking, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and walked into the ballroom looking like exactly what I was. A woman who had somewhere to be. I saw Deirdre. Before she saw me. She was standing near the entrance to the dining room with I half recognized from years of obligatory holiday appearances, her head tipped back in laughter at something one of them had said. She was wearing a cobalt blue dress, and the expression she always wore at events like this, warm, approachable, the performance of a woman who is beloved by everyone who knows her. Then she turned and saw me. The laughter didn't disappear immediately. It faded, carefully. This way she managed everything, deliberately, with control. She excused herself from her group and walked toward me, and I could see her recalibrating with every step, deciding how to play this. Thea, she said. I didn't know you'd be here. I'm speaking after lunch, I said. About the Pilsen project. Right. She nodded, a small motion, like she was filing that away somewhere. It's a good cause. Sure, she glanced around the room briefly, the way she always did, cataloging who was watching. I heard you've been keeping yourself busy. I have been. She smiled, and it was the smile I recognized, the one that looked warm from a distance and meant something else entirely up close. You know, she said, and her voice dropped just enough to be intimate while still carrying to the 2 women she'd been standing with, who had drifted closer without being obvious about it. I've been meaning to say something to you. For a while, actually. I didn't ask what. I had learned a long time ago not to hand her the opening. Randall is really thriving, she said. The word thriving landed with weight, deliberate and placed. He and Simone just bought a house in Wilmette. They're expecting in the spring. She paused, letting that settle. I just think, and I mean this kindly, Thea, I really do, that everything happened the way it was supposed to. Some people are built for that kind of life. Marriage, family, roots, and some people, she tilted her head, a gesture that managed to look thoughtful and dismissive at the same time. Some people are just built differently. There it was. I had spent 14 months imagining this conversation. Imagining what I would say, how I would say it, whether I would be angry or composed or somewhere in between. I had written speeches in my head during late-night drives home from the job site. I had rehearsed entire exchanges in the shower. What I actually felt, standing there in the hotel ballroom with 40 people arranged around us, and the faint sound of a string quartet from somewhere near the stage, was the absence of anything she was expecting. Not relief, exactly. Not triumph. Something quieter and more settled than both of those things. The particular feeling of realizing someone no longer has the power over you that they once believed they had. I appreciate that, I said, and I stepped to the side to get a glass of water from a passing tray. She blinked. She had been ready for something else. Tears, maybe. Or defensiveness. A tight smile and a subject change. She had not been ready for me to simply step around her like she was a piece of furniture in my way. I spent the first half of the luncheon at my assigned table near the front, talking to the event organizer about the Pilsen project and listening to a presentation from the nonprofit's executive director about their after-school music program. I did not look for Deirdre. I did not need to. It was during dessert that the door at the far end of the room opened. Patrick came in the way he always moved through spaces, not loudly, not performing his presence, just walking in like he had every right to be there, which he did. He was in a dark suit, no tie, carrying himself with the particular ease of someone who is used to being the person in the room who makes decisions. He scanned the ballroom once, found me, and I watched the slight change in his expression. The small shift that wasn't quite a smile, but was something better than one. Deirdre was at the table directly to my left. I heard her chair scrape back slightly as Patrick crossed the room. I didn't turn to look at her. I didn't need to. I could feel the attention sharpening around me the way you feel a change in air pressure. He reached me, rested one hand briefly at the back of my chair, the kind of natural gesture that only exists between people who have learned each other's rhythms. "Sorry I'm late," he said, low enough to be private. "The alderman's meeting ran over. You're up after the next speaker?" "After the next speaker," I confirmed. He nodded, pulled out the empty chair beside me, and sat down. Then he turned to say hello to the event organizer on my other side, and I heard Deirdre's voice before I turned to look at her. "Patrick." She said his name the way she'd said Julian in the story I was somehow now living a version of, like she was testing whether it was real. What are you doing here?" I turned then. Deirdre's face had gone through several expressions in rapid succession and had landed on something between confusion and a particular kind of dread that I had never seen on her face in 14 years of knowing her. Her hands were flat on the table. Her water glass was halfway to her lips and had stopped there. Patrick looked at her with the polite recognition you give someone you know in a professional context. "Deirdre," he said pleasantly. "Good to see you. I didn't realize you were involved with this organization." "I sit on the board," she said, and her voice had thinned in a way I recognized. That particular register of a woman who is trying to maintain composure while something is collapsing just underneath her. "I didn't know you and Thea. We're together," I said simply. I was not looking at her the way I'd imagined I might. I wasn't savoring anything. I was just telling her a fact, the same way I might tell her the luncheon started at noon. Deirdre's eyes moved between the two of us. Something was working behind them. I could see it, the calculating quality she always had, the constant reassessment. And then it shifted into something else, something like realization. "Patrick," she said slowly, "you work at Vantage Partners." "I run their capital investment division." "Yes," he said. She was very still for a moment. Then, "Randall's firm submitted a development proposal to Vantage Partners last quarter. They've been waiting on a decision for months." Her voice had gone quiet in a way it never usually was. "You're the one who reviews those." Patrick set his coffee cup down with the careful deliberateness of someone who has learned to say difficult things without making them worse. "The proposals come through my team," he said. "I can't speak to the specifics of any individual submission. But I'll say," he paused, and I saw him measure his words, "the review process has been thorough. There were some concerns about financial disclosures in the documentation that we've had to look at carefully before anything can move forward." The color didn't drain from Deirdre's face all at once. It went in stages. The pink first, from her cheeks. Then the warmth from around her eyes. By the time Patrick had finished his sentence, she looked like someone who had stepped outside expecting June and walked into February. "What kind of concerns?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm not able to discuss that here," Patrick said, and his tone wasn't genuinely kind in the way that only made it worse. "Randall will be hearing from the team in the next few days. These things are handled through proper channels." I thought about Randall then. About Simone. About the house in Wilmette and the baby in the spring and the development proposal that had apparently been sitting on Patrick's desk for the better part of a quarter, waiting for a decision that was now, based on the expression on Deirdre's face, not going to be the one they'd been hoping for. I thought about the way Deirdre had said some people are built differently 20 minutes ago, with that studied tilt of her head and her two friends close enough to hear, and I thought about how completely she had believed she was detonating something inside me. I did not feel triumphant. That's the part of these stories that nobody tells you ahead of time. You spend months, sometimes years, composing mental speeches, building the version of a moment that would finally make everything right. And then the moment arrives and what you feel is something so much quieter than anything you rehearsed. Not satisfaction in the way you expected it. More like the settling of something that had been waiting to settle for a long time. "I should go make some calls," Deirdre said. She pushed her chair back. The motion was controlled, precise. She was working very hard to leave with dignity, and she almost managed it. She stood, picked up her clutch, said "excuse me" to no one in particular, and walked toward the exit with the careful measured steps of someone who does not want to appear to be fleeing. I watched her go. Patrick put his hand over mine on the table. Just that. No commentary, no satisfied expression. Just the weight of his hand on mine, steady and present. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. And the thing was, I meant it in a way I hadn't meant it in a very long time. Not the reflexive, keep moving okay that gets you through the first months after a marriage ends. Not the performance of okay. The real version of it, the one that comes from having genuinely rebuilt something worth having and knowing, in your body and not just your head, that you did it. The event organizer touched my arm lightly from my other side. "We're almost ready for your presentation," she said. I nodded. I straightened my blazer. I picked up the small note card with my talking points and looked at it for a moment without really reading it. I knew the Pilsen project well enough to talk about it in my sleep. And then I looked out at the room, at the 40 faces arranged around their luncheon tables, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel when I'd walked through that door an hour ago. Ready. Completely, quietly, undeniably ready. I had spent the first year after my divorce wondering whether I would ever stop feeling like something I had lost. Whether the steadiness would ever come back. Whether I would ever stand in a room full of people and feel like I belonged there. Not because someone had given me the right to. Not because I was half of a couple that made sense to other people, but just because I had built something real, and it was mine, and I was standing in it. The answer had arrived in a hotel ballroom in River North on a Thursday in October, not in the way I'd imagined it would, not in a speech I'd planned or a moment I'd engineered. It had arrived the way most true things arrive, quietly sideways, while I was busy doing the work. I walked up to the podium. I introduced myself. I talked about the Pilsen Arts Center, the community meetings, the design challenges, the way the building was going to sit on that corner and serve people for the next 50 years. I talked about what it means to design for a neighborhood, instead of over it. I talked about the particular satisfaction of work that outlasts the moment you're standing in. The room was attentive. A few people took notes. When I finished and walked back to my seat, Patrick was looking at me in the way I had come to understand over the past several months. Not admiring, exactly, though there was that too. More like recognition. Like he was looking at someone he already knew and was still glad to find. Deirdre did not come back into the room. Later, in the car, Patrick asked me what she'd said before he arrived. I told him. Not all of it. Just enough. The house in Wilmette, the baby in the spring, the thing about some people being built differently. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She really believed she was going to hurt you." "She really did," I agreed. He shook his head, not unkindly. Must have been a strange afternoon for her. I looked out the window at the Chicago afternoon. Gray October light on the river, the skyline doing its particular thing where it looks different every time you see it, and still somehow always looks like home. I thought about the version of this day I had been afraid of. The version where Deirdre found me at some event, said the sharpest thing she could find, and I had to drive home alone with it rattling around in my chest. I had been afraid of that for over a year. And instead I was sitting in a car with someone who knew me, heading back to a life I had built on purpose, thinking about a building in Pilsen that was going to matter to real people for decades. "I feel sorry for her," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "She's been keeping score for so long. She doesn't know how to stop." Patrick didn't say anything to that. He just reached over and turned the heat up slightly because he knew I was always cold in October, and we drove the rest of the way home without needing to say much at all. There's a version of this story where I end it by telling you about Randall. What came of the Vantage Partners review, what happened to the Wilmette house, what Simone's spring ended up looking like. And I understand the pull of that version. I understand why people want the full accounting, the complete ledger, everything balanced and settled. But I stopped needing that accounting somewhere around the time I learned that the best proof you've moved on isn't knowing how the other story ends. It's having your own story so fully underway that you only think about theirs occasionally, and then mostly with a kind of distant, uncomplicated pity. Deirdre told 40 people at that luncheon that some women are built for permanence and some aren't. She wasn't wrong. She just had the wrong woman in mind when she said it. I signed the Pilsen construction contract the following March. Patrick and I got engaged in April, on an ordinary Tuesday night in my kitchen, over leftover Thai food, with no audience and no performance. Just the two of us deciding on something we'd both already known for a while. I thought about Deirdre exactly once during all of it. Not with anger, not even with satisfaction. With the particular calm of a woman who no longer needs someone else's opinion of her life in order to know that her life is good. And it is. It genuinely, completely, undeniably is.